If somebody told you that an algorithm was making decisions about your neighborhood, about where police show up, who gets stopped, and who gets arrested, would you trust it? The people of Oakland didn't, and they were right not to. My name is Shreyas, and I'd like to talk about the police department in Oakland, California. They adopted an algorithm called PredPol, a predictive policing tool, with the hopes of creating a more efficient and unbiased police force. However, the core of the problem lies in the fact that the algorithm itself is based on several decades of racially biased arrest records from the police department, which has already been under federal supervision for systematic racial profiling of citizens. This video will discuss the role of algorithmic decision-making in the criminal justice system of Oakland, California, where racial inequality still exists just under the guise of an unbiased decision-making algorithm. Our main stakeholder is the Justice Team Network, or JTN. They're a grassroots organization co-founded by Cat Brooks, working towards ending state violence against communities of color in Oakland, California. Our other stakeholder is the Oakland City Police Department, or OPD, who have implemented PredPol and claimed it to be unbiased. Now, according to JTN, under the leadership of Cat Brooks, they're saying that predictive policing in the criminal justice system of Oakland does not remove racial bias, but rather codifies it and continues to carry forward the same racial bias, this time through the false authority of objectivity. One kind of important paper that I want to talk about that really supports this idea is Lee and Bjorkenlund-Larsson's argument in How Should We Theorize Algorithms? 5 Ideal Types in Analyzing Algorithmic Normativities. It argues that all algorithms should reflect human values, and that supports the JTN's viewpoint that PredPol is encoded with Oakland's history of racial profiling, and rather than eliminating it, it works based off of it. Now, Lee and Bjorkenlund-Larsson's basic idea in this paper is that there is a set of human values underlying every single algorithm. And there's no way to have a truly neutral or objective algorithm. That means, in the context of Oakland, is that the PredPol algorithm was not a math problem. It was always a political problem. Every single choice made in the creation of the PredPol algorithm was a choice based on the values of the people creating it. And those values, JTN contends, could not be divorced from the OPD's well-documented history of racial profiling. The idea that PredPol was not a neutral or objective algorithm is the exact reason that JTN called it a disaster. They're not anti-science. They're simply pointing out that the science it was based off of has a flawed foundation. For the JTN, the issue of community oversight of the OPD's technology was not a matter of rejecting the data. It was a matter of requiring the politics inherent to the data to be made visible to the people most impacted by it. Moving on to another paper that supports them. In another paper that supports the JTN, Koenig and Welsenberger's findings in The Opportunity for Renewal or Disruptive Force, How AI Alters Democratic Politics, is a paper that states that algorithmic governance undermines democratic oversight, and that supports the JTN's viewpoint in that OPD's use of PredPol stripped Oakland residents of their right to challenge how they are policed. The one notion that this paper really is centered around is that when a state outsources decisions to an algorithm, it is in fact taking that decision out of the realm of democratic accountability. In the case of Oakland, this was literally the case, as the people had no one to appeal to when the OPD has outsourced the decision of where to deploy PredPol. In fact, the people had no way to examine the decision of the PredPol algorithm to deploy police to their neighborhood. This is the exact phenomenon JTN recognized and has named as their primary concern with the predictive policing. This is why JTN's core ask was not simply that PredPol be terminated, but that they have power over the technology they were policed by. Koenig and Welsenberger provide a theoretical justification for what JTN has already learned through lived experience. Accountability should not and cannot be outsourced to an algorithm. The JTN's campaign to get the Oakland City Council to ban PredPol was in effect an effort to reestablish democratic accountability to a policing system that had quietly ceded it off to a software company. Next paper I want to bring up is Ensig's paper, Runaway Feedback Loops in Predictive Policing. And it kind of says that predictive policing systems validate their own biased outputs with no mechanisms for correction supports. So this is kind of like the main idea that they go over. Predictive policing will direct police to a certain area, police arrest those people in the area, and those arrests train the next version of the algorithm, so on and so forth, with no ever way to correct the initial bias. In Oakland, where OPD was already over-arresting Black and Latino people, PredPol wasn't learning where the crime was actually occurring. It was learning where OPD had been looking. The algorithm was simply ratifying the bias that created it. This is exactly why JTN argued that PredPol could not be regulated. It had to be outright banned. JTN understood you cannot reform something whose fundamental mechanism is to perpetrate its own existing discrimination. This research just puts a scientific credential behind what they already knew from the ground up. The problem wasn't PredPol, it was how it's being deployed and what it was designed to do. The final paper I really want to bring up is Isaac and Lum's simulation, and it's called To Predict and Serve, and it shows that PredPol would actually deploy police twice the rate into Black communities based on the arrest history rather than actual crime. This supports JTN's viewpoint that PredPol mapped where OPD had historically chose to look. The main concept Lum and Isaac were exploring through their research is the notion that the PredPol program, when given the data from the drug arrests in Oakland, would allocate twice the amount of police presence in Black communities when compared to white communities. Not only based on the rate of drug usage, but based on the rate of arrests in those communities. This is the fundamental concept that JTN is based upon their opposition to the PredPol program in Oakland. For the JTN, the simulation created by Lum and Isaac was not an abstraction, but rather a picture of what was actually happening to the citizens of East Oakland. Kat Brooks and JTN had been asserting for years that the data coming out of the OPD showed where the police were looking rather than where the crime actually was. Lum and Isaac had quantified this effect for us, and this resource lends more empirical weight to the argument put forward by JTN. Now, this all kind of ties back into the idea that JTN and Kat Brooks are opposed to the use of predictive polling in Oakland based on the moral and historical grounds, stating that police departments still under federal consent decree for racial violence should not be providing trustworthy data to use of any algorithm. JTN's objection to predictive policing were based on historical understanding of Oakland's past, which had been ignored by the city officials and the technologists. In 2003, the OPD agreed to a federal consent decree after a scandal in which police officers had systematically beaten, robbed, and falsely imprisoned Black people in the city. Almost 2 decades later, the OPD has still not complied with these conditions set by the decree, and yet the city was about to introduce a predictive policing algorithm based on the arrest records of this very same police department in question. For Kat Brooks and JTN, this is not a matter of technological efficacy. It's a matter of morality. JTN's position was never a technological one. It was always a moral one. They're not anti-technology. They just understand that the algorithm is only as moral as the people it is based off of. A police force that was never made to be responsible for its racial violence should not be trusted to provide unbiased data, and this data could not be used for the basis of fair policing. JTN and Kat Brooks were actually able to translate the power of the people's opposition into political power by creating a coalition of over 17 organizations, which eventually led to the unanimous Oakland City Council ban on predictive policing in December 2020, making it the first ban in the nation. JTN believed predictive policing was wrong, and they made a difference about it. Rather than simply being a critic, JTN was able to construct a coalition so broad that a ban was politically necessary. By uniting racial justice organizations with civil liberty organizations like EFF and the ACLU, Kat Brooks and JTN created a singular voice that would challenge the surveillance state in a way that would be impossible to ignore by any member of the city council. The unanimous vote in December of 2020 shows that JTN really made community accountability a moral imperative, and a political strategy that can be accomplished. Oakland would become the first city in the nation to pass this type of ban because JTN understood that to combat algorithmic racism, it would take both moral vision and an organizational heft, and they provided it. What about the Oakland Police Department, though? What did they think? They defended Predpol as a race-neutral crime reduction strategy. And we have directly contested this idea the whole time. But they believe that Predpol is an appropriate or scientific tool in the service of public safety. In other words, the algorithm eliminated individual officer discretion and therefore individual bias in patrol decisions. OPD pointed to crime hotspot data as race-neutral input, and they argued that the algorithm focused on places and not people. This created the appearance of scientific legitimacy that protected Predpol from scrutiny. But, as we've talked about before, OPD's perspective was not supported when examined closely. This race-neutral crime data provided by the department doesn't really work because they were under federal supervision for racial profiling. The algorithm did not eliminate bias, it merely laundered it. OPD's concern with Predpol's legitimacy is the precise reason that community oversight, not departmental self-assessment, is the key to eliminating racist governance in our areas. More recently, JTN and Cat Brooks have had to fight against flock surveillance cameras in Oakland in 2024 and 2025, using the same data-driven arguments that were previously used for the deployment of Predpol. The flock cameras controversy illustrates a phenomenon the thesis predicts will emerge. Surveillance technology will not back down when it's banned, it'll simply rebrand. Flock cameras were given the same data-driven crime-reducing language and strategy that Predpol was given, and flock cameras bet on the fact that a new product name would change the conversation. JTN luckily did not allow this, and they show the same level of community accountability and understanding of the underlying logic of the opposing party. JTN's response to flock cameras is not a new fight. It is the exact same fight, and it proves the thesis correct in its understanding that community accountability is the only way to check the power of algorithmic governance. JTN's successful campaign to ban predictive policing in Oakland proves that algorithmic tools do not transcend the racial hierarchies that embed their training data, and that sustained community-led accountability, not technological reform, is the only adequate response to surveillance systems that launder discrimination through the language of data. Every piece in this video is building towards one conclusion. Predictive policing in Oakland wasn't a technological solution to a crime problem. It was a political implemented racial discrimination on a massive scale. From the proof offered by Lee and Bjerken Larson on the values inherent in algorithms, to the data presented in Lum and Isaac indicating a 2-1 racial targeting, to the feedback loop by NSYG's academic study, verifies that JTN has been asserting through their own lived experiences. Predpol made systematic racism invisible by dressing in the language of data. The Oakland story, though, does not end with harm. It ends with a ban. The unanimous city council vote in 2020, led by JTN and a coalition of 17+ organizations, demonstrated that community accountability is not only a principle, it is a practice. The ongoing fight against flock cameras reminds us, though, that this fight is never really finished. As long as surveillance technology continues to improve, so will the fight against it need to improve. Thank you.